So there's a problem with Georgia at number 6 for Oklahoma and a problem with Oregon State and Utah at number 7, number 8 for Oklahoma. And I want to talk about how all these things work and why I think that the committee got this wrong. I mean, really wrong. All that's coming up after the bumper.
Don't be cornering me. Hold up. Time. You got to help me with that corner shit.
What's up, kid folk? It's RJ Young. I'm not on a step mill. Consider hitting the like and subscribe button because I upload a video every single day. It's always college-related, sports-related. We have a good time. And today I want to talk about the rankings, especially when you take into account opponent records and the strength of record measurement before we get into conference championships with the debut of the College Football Playoff Selection Committee's rankings that came out last night. Now, I also want to encourage you to please sign up for my newsletter where I write my thoughts down at length and I give free stuff. Use your Hotmail address. I'm just looking for the stats to grow right now. Just help me out and I'll give you an opportunity to win this OU lamp. I understand not everybody that watches this channel is an OU fan, but I figure you can give it away at a Dirty Santa party or to your favorite Texas fan as a trolling gift, or Oklahoma State fan or Notre Dame fan, or whomever you want to, give this thing away to. All right, so we got Georgia at number 6, right? And I think a lot of people have a problem with that because the Playoff Selection Committee ranked Notre Dame inside the top 25, giving Georgia 2 wins against their top 25. Fine. We'll all let the Florida one go. We think that's a good win. But Notre Dame is not, especially since Michigan beat Notre Dame like they stole something. Just beat them down 45-14. And you take into account Notre Dame doesn't play for a conference championship. And you take into account Notre Dame scheduled Bowling Green State and New Mexico, who's nobody when we're talking about quality wins, right? We also need to take into account there that Michigan already got beat by Wisconsin, already barely got a win against Iowa, and got beat down by Penn State. I mean, that should be enough to knock Notre Dame out of the top 25 and put somebody else in that spot. I could think of a couple of teams that I would love to see in that top 25. But before I get to that, let's go through Georgia's remaining record, though, like for their opponents' remaining record. So Georgia has Missouri, Auburn, A&M, and Georgia Tech left. Missouri's 5-3. Auburn is 7-2. A&M is 6-3, and then Georgia Tech's 2-6. So their opponents' combined record is 20-14, right? But if you drop that Georgia Tech game, which nobody thinks is going to help them anyway, you still get 18-8. That's a solid opponent record left through the month of November. Meanwhile, Oregon has Oregon State, Arizona, and Arizona State. Oregon State is 4-4, Arizona State is 5-3, and Arizona is 4-5. That means that the combined record of Oregon's remaining opponents is just 13-12, just one game over 500. Utah is even worse than that. They have games left against UCLA, Arizona, and Colorado. UCLA is 4-5, Arizona is 4-5, and Colorado is 3-6. That's a combined opponent record of 11-16. And if you take those two teams and you combine them together, Oregon and Utah, you get a combined opponent record of 24-8. That's 4 games below 500. Meanwhile, Oklahoma has games left against Iowa State, Baylor, and Oklahoma State. Iowa State is 5-3. Baylor, we all know, is 8-0. And Oklahoma State is 6-3. 2 of those teams are top 25 teams according to the Playoff Selection Committee. And that's a combined opponent record remaining of 19-6. That's stout, man. That's really stout. And you think that if Kansas State can get its way into the Big 12 championship, Oklahoma gets an opportunity to beat up on a top 25 team that beat it. But even if they don't, they might get Baylor, right, who might make it through with one loss to Oklahoma. And then you get another top 25 team to beat up on again. So Oklahoma could finish with at least 3 top 25 wins if they win a conference championship, according to the Playoff Selection Committee's poll. But if you want to throw the Texas thing in there, like a lot of people do, you'd end up with 4, right? And I think the idea here for me is that Oklahoma is going to leapfrog Oregon and Utah just on the strength of record and winning games. Georgia is the turd in the punch bowl because there's no catching them. If they go through and win a conference championship, they're getting in. That's what it's going to take. But a conference championship from Georgia and a conference championship from Oklahoma, Oklahoma's probably going to be sitting there at number 5. And that's before we start talking about Penn State perhaps having one loss against Ohio State and what they might do. They might not have a conference championship, so that would be your measurement, right? Ohio State could have the same thing happen, right? If they end up with just the one loss and they don't win a conference championship, they're probably going to get in because the committee likes them so much at number one. And it would be interesting to see what would happen if Minnesota did the same, but it already seems like they don't value Minnesota at all. And it really seems like this is going to end up with at least one SEC team, right? One Big Ten team, Clemson. So that's 3. So now we're talking about that 4th spot, and we think Oklahoma could get there if they get help from Georgia, right? Because if Georgia wins out and you can keep LSU and Alabama out of the playoff, that's a spot. So I want to lay that out there. I think these things are going to work themselves out, but it's worth talking about right now. ESPN's Heather Dinich dropped a terribly interesting story on Tuesday. She surveyed 62 coaches in the NCAA's football subdivision to find out which one of them thinks the current form of deciding which team has won the sport's national title is good or bad, and what should happen next in the 6th year of the 12-year agreement to allow selection committees to decide which 4 of the 130 FBS programs should be given the privilege of competing for the national championship in a 4-team playoff format. And let's be clear, the 10 conferences and ESPN could expand the playoff format anytime they want. ESPN doesn't own the playoff. They just own the rights to air it on television. Now, 65 coaches were asked to give their opinion in a survey with Dinich. 3 of them, LSU's Ed Orgeron, Alabama's Nick Saban, and UCLA's Chip Kelly, declined to give an opinion in the ultimate diplomatic response, which is to say, hey, no, I don't want to do this. 51 coaches said they trusted the selection committee to get the 4 best teams right. That's a significant chunk. Only 35 said they still understood the criteria for how to get teams into the playoff, though. And 36 said they don't think that winning a conference championship should be a requirement for getting in. Texas head coach Tom Herman offered up our conference. You can go 12-0 and your starting quarterback rolls his ankle in the conference title game and you stub your toe and you don't recover from it and you're not rewarded for anything. Being your conference championship game winner should factor in, but I don't think it should be a requirement, nor should the winner be an automatic bid in this form of a playoff system. That's easy to say when you've lost the last 4 titles to Oklahoma and won just 1 conference title since 2009. Now, 38 of these head coaches thought there should be a uniform scheduling model across the FBS to force more difficult scheduling. Lincoln Riley told Dinich, I'd love to see us get to a point where every league, their conference championship game is 1 versus 2. I think that's healthier for the sport. To me, if you're going to do divisions, everybody needs to do divisions. If you're not going to do divisions, everyone needs to do 1 versus 2. That's what creates the best conference championship games and the most valuable resume the committee can evaluate on somewhat of an even playing field. Now, that's Lincoln Riley also taking a shot at what the SEC has been able to do or not depending on able to do, depending on how you want to look at it in the SEC East and SEC West. 30 of the 62 coaches thought that the playoffs should expand to 8 or more and offered up, some insight into how they feel about their opinions and why they think their opinions are such a big deal. Mike Gundy said there should be 8 in. If you win your conference, there's 5 of us, Power 5. You win that, you're in. The Central Floridas of the world, the Boise's of the world, who are 12-0, or whoever the highest ranked team is in those conferences, they should be in. As it sits right now, there's not ever a school at that level that's going to get into the playoff. Not going to happen. You had Central Florida go 12-0 twice, and they didn't get in. So that proves it's not going to happen. If Central Florida were to get in, you can take them and you play them against the number 4 team. You don't put them against the number 1 team. Let's just say if they come in as the 8, they play the 4. That way, it will be more exciting and competitive for the country to watch on television. Mike Gundy, actually a voice of reason here. Nebraska head coach Scott Frost coached one of those 12-0 Central Florida teams Gundy was talking about, and he added, any sport where a championship can be decided by a committee in a room, it's subjective and it is not the right sport for me. Gymnastics would frustrate the crap out of me. People love the Cinderella. They love Loyola of Chicago in the basketball tournament or Butler. That's also a very good point because I loved the idea of Appalachian State having a shot at the title till they lost to Georgia Southern, and now they will never get a shot at the title with a one loss in a Sun Belt conference. Dabo Swinney offered he thinks that every game the Clemson Tigers play matters, saying, quote, everybody focuses on the playoff games and the national championship. The way that we have it right now, every game we have, especially once we were positioned, every game was a playoff game. Every game. Duke was a playoff game. South Carolina was a playoff game. Pitt was a playoff game. We have layers of playoffs. The more you expand, the less the season matters, especially if a team so-called already in the playoff, well, now you're going to have people not playing guys just like you have in all the other sports. All of a sudden, games don't matter because everybody is just playing for the playoff and they're in. What we have is the best of both. What we have is the best of both worlds. It's late. I'm sorry. Now, we also need to add in there, Dabo Swinney also was scheduling teams like Charlotte and paying Wofford $360,000 to beat them up. And no one in their right mind would say that either one of those games qualifies as a playoff game, even for little old Clemson. Now, Michigan head coach Jim Harbaugh at least offered up a plan that feels fair. 15 games, 11 teams, starting with each Power 5 conference champion, determined within a 12-game regular season by a conference record and tiebreakers, similar to how the NFL chooses its division winners. He then suggests using the BCS system to rank teams 6 through 11 to determine the rest of the field. The number 1 seed would be the highest ranking BCS Power 5 champion. The number 1 and number 2 seeds get a bye. There's also room for a top-ranked non-Power 5 team like Notre Dame and a worthy Group of 5 champion. On the first Saturday of December, instead of playing your conference championship games, the playoff would begin. He added, you'd still have the same bowl structure that you have now, and teams that lost on December 1st, it's like they would have been in the championship game, and then they play a bowl game. Now, there's a lot of reasons why this works, but he likes to add nobody would play more than 16 games, or nobody would play 16 games. So would you exist with the same 15 that you'd have to win or play to win a national championship in this current model? But it's worth adding here that 36 coaches thought their players could handle a 16-game schedule. And while coaches can't change the format, they do have influence with the commissioners plus Notre Dame's athletic director, Jack Swarbrick. But what about Notre Dame? Should an independent be included? This would go for BYU too, but Pitt coach Pat Narduzzi, who coaches in the ACC, said, why does Notre Dame get into the playoff if they didn't play in a championship game? They got one foot in the door in the ACC. How come they didn't have to go beat Clemson like we had to at a certain point? And it's a valid criticism because right now the ACC is Clemson, Wake Forest with one loss, and a bunch of other teams you don't really trust. While, there's no consensus here, we do have good discussion, and I love good discussion about what is the best way to move forward. And that's what we've done in this sport. But I believe the FBS could look no further than the FCS for how this sport should evolve, especially when you look at Appalachian State. As Ryan Nani at Banner Society pointed out, App State won 3 FCS titles, 3 straight FCS titles from 2005 to 2007, but those weren't perfect years in Boone. The 05 team lost 2 FBS games, lost to Furman, and ranked number 5 in the polls entering the playoff. And the 07 team, the one that beat Michigan, lost 2 FCS upsets, and again ranked 5 entering the playoffs. The 06 team only lost to NC State. For Appalachian State's purposes, those poll rankings didn't really matter. The 05 committee ranked Appalachian State at number 2, and the 07 team ranked well enough to end up hosting 3 games. And even if App State had somehow ranked poorly, they could have relied on the Southern Conference Championship as an automatic bid. Of course, they still had to put in a lot of work after that to capture those titles. 4 rounds with multiple single-score victories for the 05 and 07 squads. But what about the 16-team playoff? Or 24, like the FCS? While most disagree with me about my wet dream of a 16-team playoff, there are benefits to a larger pool of teams getting into a tournament to play for a title like a bunch of games on campus, for instance, and more importantly, a fairer way to decide who the best team is in college football.